Hi guys, it's Shira Bennard, the CEO and co-founder of NightCap. We are on a mission to prevent drink spiking, and today we're here with Kailee Billerbeck, the CEO and co-founder of Everyday Armor. She is redefining and making self-defense accessible. Kailee travels the world teaching sorority women how to protect themselves, and now she's going to talk to you about how you can protect yourself. This episode is tailored specifically for students, so if you guys are stepping foot onto a college campus this semester, this is exactly where you need to be. Enjoy the episode.
What do you think students are underestimating the most before they get to college or during?
I think that our bodies naturally tell us when we feel unsafe or when we're feeling anxious. When you're walking by yourself, we naturally feel anxious. We feel way more alert. I think the things that are kind of underestimated are a lot of the situations where we're around people we know. We've already kind of like dropped our guard. And that's where, we do tend to drink more. Maybe we aren't watching our drinks as much. Those kinds of situations where we're most at risk, these kinds of crimes around the people that we actually know to some extent. I think that those are a lot of the situations we don't tend to consider, and alcohol is a huge, huge piece of that, especially going into the red zone, going back to college and school.
Tell us more while we're on the red zone. Tell us more about what that is. I'm very excited to have you, and I would love to just jump right into it. And you can just start with, what is Everyday Armor? Who's Kailee? And how'd you get into this?
Yeah, totally. So, Everyday Armor, basically, we go around teaching college students about safety, about self-defense, and we post a lot of stuff online to kind of reach a broader audience. And our goal is really to make the self-defense we teach and the safety more relatable, more realistic. So it feels like, okay, this isn't just, use the buddy system when I'm gonna have to walk alone at some point in life. It's more of like, hey, let's meet you where you're at and make these things realistic so you can still add layers of safety. And I, trained in martial arts up until I left for college. And then when I went to college and was in a sorority, I feel like I was just around so many situations where, first of all, like safety wasn't really talked about. Self-defense wasn't really a thing. We never did a class in my sorority. And then on top of that, too, there's so many situations you don't even think about where you might feel unsafe. And there's so much more to it than just the physical aspect. And after experiencing a lot of situations where it wasn't really like the physical stuff that would have helped me out of an unsafe situation. It was more of the mental and situational aspect. That's kind of what like sparked an interest in me to make sure that we gave kind of more well-rounded safety and that we spoke again, like more realistically to students.
Yeah, and you talk about students. What made you want to start with them?
So I actually started with young kids. So it was more like anywhere from like ages like 5 up through like high school typically. And I was working on just kind of like first we started did a lot more self-defense and like martial arts. And then we kind of got into as I was doing those classes, I started talking about safety and then I started also seeing more stuff online as social media started to take off. And I just thought that there was so much misinformation out there, stuff that my friends even believed. And was like, okay, we have to correct some of these myths and misconceptions with safety because number one, it makes us more fearful of situations we're not really even fully at risk for. There's like myths that are going around about like, people lying under your car waiting to slash your Achilles. And there's even creators that don't make it feel like this is like some big trend and stuff. So I really wanted to correct those types of things, but also just kind of thinking back, even, I mean, of course, high schoolers and kids still need the safety element, but to me, I just felt like I loved getting to speak to a little bit more of a mature audience that was in a lot of these situations where you're off by yourself for the first time. You're navigating young adulthood and there are more influences. You don't have, parents around as much. And so you're kind of relying on yourself. So I wanted to kind of find a way to reach them. And I just honestly like didn't have the patience I think for kids. I've worked with kids a lot throughout like my martial arts stuff and I still love it, but I just found more of a passion with like college age students.
Oh my gosh. So you said something about misinformation, and I have to tell you this. I was at a comedy show last night,
Hmm.
and this guy's an influencer. He had two openers, and one of the openers had an entire bit on women's safety and how we all walk around with our keys in between our fingers, and all I could think about was you and how you say that's not right. Like we're not supposed to
Yes.
be doing that.
No, and I love that people are kind of like that the comedy world is even like taking on some of this stuff because I think that, and the thing is, I think a lot of these tips are said in good faith. Like people
Yeah.
want to help and like, oh, you know what, this could be a good idea. It's something people carry with them. But then they don't really play out the whole situation where like a young woman holding a key between her fists requires that she's in hand-to-hand combat. So why wouldn't we tell her to put a pepper spray in her hand or even just a water bottle or like a personal alarm to give her a little bit more distance and space before she's in that physical altercation? So I
Yeah.
love that people are like pointing it out. And I feel like honestly, because of like NightCap, because of Invisaware, because of a lot of people like safely talking about these things. And I think especially women, I feel like it's gotten so much more traction where safety and self-defense is being talked about more just in general too.
It is crazy. I feel like I'm like, I think we started the conversation around drink spiking. Like, I think people just like had it happen to them and they didn't say anything because there's so much guilt and shame that comes with it that no one talked about it. And now you hear all these stories. Everyone I talk to at least has a story or knows someone that has a story. But
Hmm.
these weren't conversations, or at least they weren't super open conversations that you could have. And it's
Hmm.
great because it's a time where we need to be, unfortunately, talking about these things. But you talk a lot about students and situational awareness. And what do you think students are underestimating the most before they get to college or during?
Yeah, I love that question because I think that our bodies naturally tell us when we feel unsafe or when we're feeling anxious, when you're walking by yourself or when you're in a parking lot or a parking garage, we naturally feel anxious. We feel way more alert. I think the things that are kind of underestimated are a lot of the situations where we're around people we know. We've already kind of like dropped our guard. They're mentally, situationally, physically close to us, where we're not thinking, oh, because I'm at a party with people I know and they're like friends of my friends or we all go to school together, nothing's going to happen. And that's where, we do tend to drink more. We aren't watching our drinks as much. Those kinds of situations where we're most at risk for, these kinds of crimes around the people that we actually know to some extent, especially when it comes to crimes committed by acquaintances because we can also sometimes, we hear a lot about like domestic violence and current or former partners, but then there's also the classmate. There's the neighbor that lives, in your dorm that maybe you don't talk to all the time, but they're still seeing you, watching you, that maybe know your routine, somebody you work with. I think that those are a lot of the situations we don't tend to consider. And alcohol is a huge, huge piece of that, especially going into the red zone, going back to college and school.
Tell us more while we're on the red zone. Tell us more about what that is.
Yeah, so basically just like a period, typically when about like students go back to school until about like Thanksgiving, where there is an increase in especially sexual violence. And a lot of that does take place in situations where there's more drinking and obviously going back to school, there's so many things. It's fun. You have sorority recruitment, you have football season, and everybody's excited to come back and see each other. And that's where again, you should be able to celebrate, to have fun but just have some of those layers of safety knowing that there is and it's an especially vulnerable time too.
When you talk about layers of safety, are you talking more so about awareness and physical products? What are your layers consisting of?
Yeah, I love that question. So we kind of like to make it simple, like we talk about three types of self-defense. So mental, situational, physical. But then within each of those, there's also added layers. So like mental self-defense, first of all, building self-esteem. I know that it sounds so corny and like, of course, but being able to set boundaries or even understanding what your boundaries are is super critical. And not caring what people are going to think if you need to honor one of those but also your inner circle, like who are the people you're keeping close, who are the people you're going out with. And even if this is your first year at college and you're just meeting some people for the first time, you still get a vibe about people. You kind of know, like, is this the person that might try to be kind of cool around the person that they like and maybe are going to leave me hanging or put me down or make me feel uncomfortable? Or is this somebody who's really going to make sure that if I'm not feeling good, I just went through a breakup because, I broke up with the person I was with over summer, whatever it is, and I'm going to school and maybe I'm going to be drinking a little bit more. Maybe they are, that they would have my back and kind of be there for me. So, building self-esteem, looking at that inner circle, having the tools to set those boundaries if confrontation isn't comfortable, all those kinds of different things that you're just kind of preparing for. Then you have the actual situation. making sure you're alert, making sure you're aware, choosing if you're somebody who wants to carry tactical items, training with it. So many different little things and daily habits that often aren't like, they don't have to be so flashy and crazy like we see in the action thriller movies and stuff, or like the CIA type thing. It's sometimes just like the most basic things, like staying alert and having confident body language, and then having your plan for a worst case scenario.
Mhm.
Not only does it make it so a lot of times it can actually increase the success of your response by just visualizing having a plan, but also just helping ease some anxieties and stuff if something were to go south. And even if you do everything right, you have every layer of safety, things can still happen. So just kind of having all of those things thought through and prepared.
That's an amazing answer. I love that so much. And you go to college campuses, as something that you do for a living. So tell
Mhm.
us about what those classes that you're teaching consist of. I've always been pretty curious myself. So
Yes.
walk us through like a typical class.
Yes, I got to get you to one of the classes. That would be so much fun. We They're they're really, first of all, designed to be like fun. We're not really the stuffy, like scary, throwing a bunch of stats at you kind of safety lecture. We try to make sure that it's really a class built to be safety shouldn't, self-defense should not be one and done. Let me just say that. But it's built for, to have everything in one go of it that are actual things you can implement right after the class, even if you don't have a bunch of extensive training. So we do the mental stuff. So looking at, how to set boundaries, how to handle confrontation. I ask in every single class if people feel uncomfortable with confrontation, and a large majority of the hands go up, if not every single one. So, looking at how to navigate, like we kind of talked about, those underestimated situations where you might know somebody and maybe standing up or setting a boundary doesn't feel comfortable. Then we go into just like myths with safety, how a lot of crimes actually occur, how your perpetrator's getting close to you, misconceptions with that. Then we go into the situational stuff. We do like pepper spray demos. We use actually safely like practice canisters, and they get to practice spraying at each other, and there's just water obviously in those canisters. And then we'll go through just like general tips for different situations people feel anxious in, depending on what the chapter or the group wants to cover. And then we get into the physical stuff, and that's normally about like half the class. And we'll do fun escapes. Some of them might be really advanced, some are more simple. They typically get to choose. And then we look at more realistic stuff for a physical encounter with somebody where, where do you strike? How do you yell for help? Again, what are some myths around that? And that's kind of how we conclude the class.
Interesting. Have you ever come across someone that you've taught, or like, I guess, what was the most surprising thing someone ever told you after or during a self-defense class? Maybe like something you taught them saved their life, or maybe they had found themselves in like a previous situation before and they were like, oh my God, this feels familiar. Have you ever had that?
Yeah. So before I actually go into any class, I always ask, is there anything, and I'll ask like the event planner, is there anything that's really sensitive, anything that we shouldn't cover that we should be sensitive to? Like I taught a class at Michigan State right after they had the shooting on their campus, literally a month after. So, just trying to be really mindful of that, because it is more lighthearted. We want people to feel, number one, so it's fun and impactful, but also so they don't feel scared walking out of it. And I'd gone into a class, had that same conversation, but they happened to have a situation, and I was teaching at their retreat. So I just don't think that there was even time for the event planner to like remember to tell me. And so I went into it, and I'm almost like, in a way, glad that I didn't, because it was such a sensitive situation. And I feel like, judging from what somebody came up and said to me after, that it actually went the way it was supposed to. But there was a girl who had experienced a situation. She was in a relationship and she was hospitalized because of some abuse, and it was very recent. And one of her friends came up to me and was like, I just want you to know, like, my friend was in this class, she just had this happen, and she was so surprised and like found this so helpful. And it was one of and this was probably 5 years ago now, and I will like never forget that,
Yeah.
because I think that it's really important that we are able to talk about these things in a way that doesn't feel so heavy, in a way that, because so many people have experiences with things, or, might end up having experiences. So being able to talk about it in a way that is empowering, that's not always so heavy, where everybody still gets this information. So I would say for me, that was like the most surprising, like wild conversation I've had after a class, and one that really, really stuck with me.
I'm so happy that you shared that, and that probably gets you through some really difficult times as well, to just know that you're making such an impact. You're really great at speaking about these topics, is what I'm trying to say. And
Thank you.
sometimes when students are given such serious tips or advice, they can kind of feel like they're relentless. And I'm, including myself, when I was in college, I was that way as well. Like, I didn't think anything would ever happen to me. And
Mhm.
so how does someone start the conversation with their friend group that wants their friends to be aware of this? Like, they go to their friends, like, how do they start talking about it, and what plans should they be putting in place?
Yeah, and I love that you point that out 'cause I was the same way. I was like, nothing would ever happen to me. And like next thing you know, right before I started Everyday Armor, I found myself like passed out drunk on a beach in the middle of the night in Mexico and got all my things stolen. So you never think it's gonna be you, and then it does happen. Like things can happen, and when you're in situations where people do feel anxious, I think like bringing up like little tips and trying to implement them as daily habits, modeling certain things so people kind of just they see you doing it, so it makes it easier for them to do it, or maybe they're not even thinking about it, like putting your phone away when you're walking by yourself, those kinds of things. But also when it comes to drink safety, maybe you're somebody that like really wants to make sure that you do have a drink cover, that you have testing strips or whatever it might be. I think sometimes almost like gamifying it with your friends and making it fun, having your code word, where it doesn't have to feel like you're giving anybody a lecture or coming, at them. And hopefully you're able to have these conversations privately where you can talk about it in a more of a serious way, but maybe you're just getting to know people or it feels uncomfortable to breach the subject. I think it could be like, oh my gosh, I just got these drink testing strips. Like, should we try them out tonight? Or I just got this drink cover and I'm gonna put it on my drink. Like, I think we should do this and we can like match it with our outfits. Whatever you have to do to kind of gamify it, make it fun. And I think once you start doing those things and again they become more habitual, then not everybody's always thinking about it too. And just kind of like being proactive and being a model to your friend group.
Man, I'm so sorry to hear that happened to you. I feel like we were probably the same in college, and unfortunately, I think that's why I look back at my college experience and I'm like, oof. I'm
Yes.
too prepared. But is there anything that students, I know you covered so much, but like, is there anything that we haven't covered that you think students should absolutely know during college, before college, freshmen that have never been to a campus before? What is like the one thing that you would leave them with if you had one more piece of advice?
Obviously, there's a lot of general principles that are best applied to everybody. But with that being said, too, safety isn't always one size fits all. The things that you might carry, the things you might do, or that your friends do may not work for you. Great example of that is tactical items. If you're not going to practice with it, I would advise looking for something that doesn't require as much practice, especially the more intense they are, the more practice you should have with them. So I think that just in general, like understanding that it's not always going to look the same for every person. You're just trying to have as many layers of safety as possible, but also you can go out and be a human being. And just because your safety isn't black or white does not mean you're unsafe, does not mean a conversation ends there. Just because you have to walk by yourself, or just because maybe you accepted a drink and you didn't watch it being made. Obviously, we all know the safest principle there, but that doesn't mean that it ends there. You can still implement things, and even just in again those interpersonal situations where you're with people where maybe you feel uncomfortable setting a boundary. And of course, no is a complete sentence and you're allowed to have upfront confrontation, but you might be dealing with somebody who's extra pushy, who is intoxicated, who you're maybe afraid of their physical response around, whatever it might be, you're allowed to feel uncomfortable with confrontation. And that's where like we talk about like having non-negotiable emergencies. I would really advise, and this is one of those things, it's so easy to think, oh, this is so corny, but truly, we've all been in situations where we're like, I don't want to be the person that leaves or that says no, or you just kind of feel uncomfortable. But just having something that, people can't push back at, where if I say I'm tired and I'm dealing with somebody that's really pushy, of course, that should be enough. But maybe they keep trying to barter with you and they're like, well, I'll get you a Red Bull, or we can be home by this time. Can we just go to the after party? So looking at something, giving an excuse that is non-negotiable. Like you can't change the situation. and something that has to be dealt with right then and there. So you don't have to sit in that conversation or that situation and keep engaging. It immediately takes you out. Like, a bathroom emergency, or my roommate's locked out. I'm the only person with a key. They're about to get sick. Like, I have to go help them out. Things that you can't change that are emergencies, and just having those thought through, things that feel realistic for you, whether maybe it's a stranger coming up to you or they're people you know. So maybe the excuse you would use with a stranger versus somebody you know might be a little bit different, but just having those on hand so that when you're in those situations and you don't feel comfortable, you can just kind of pull those out and remove yourself a little bit easier. I think it's just really important, and just, we're allowed to be human. It's not always going to be perfect, and that's life. And the more we accept that it's not always going to be perfect, that opens up the conversation for how to address those situations when we aren't using those black or white safety tips.
Yeah. Wow, I love that. Thank you so much. Can you tell us how to find you and all your amazing tips? Like, everyone just go through Kailee's social. You'll be like super educated on self-defense, but also, like, where else can we find you aside from social? Is there more content we can consume?
Thank you. Yes. So we have a couple different ways to like get involved. Obviously, we have lots of like free resources for more education stuff. We have a podcast, we have our social media channels, and we do also have free guides too. So like for those excuses, we have them for just areas to strike on a perpetrator if you don't have a lot of training. And we also have one I know a lot of people fear, like, open fire, active situations. So if that's something that you fear, we have free guides for people, and we'll give you the link and everything for that. But on Instagram, we're Everyday Armor Official. Armor is ARMOR. And then on TikTok and YouTube, we're just Everyday Armor ARMOR. And then we do have ways to, if like people want to make more money, we have an academy that's launching, and that's built for everybody. Anybody can take it individually, with just like crime education, monthly guides, demos, lives, all kinds of stuff. So if people are interested in being affiliates for that, we are actually taking like early affiliates right now, and they can make money referring safety and kind of giving the gift of safety. And then if people want to bring us to their campus, they can email us, contact us, submit a form online. And we are always hiring instructors. So if anybody wants to instruct, they do have to be 21 or over, because we do talk about, drinking and that kind of stuff. So if anybody's interested, they can find us, and we'll give you the link to all of it too.
I love it. Thank you so much.
Of course.